Hello everybody, it's Miss Camp again. We have another video of rhetorical devices. So let's get started. Your test on these will be on Thursday, February 4th. Okay, first of all, number 41 is paradox. Now, most of you know this term. It means a statement that seems contradictory, but it's actually true when you look at it a little more deeply. It's a specific type of irony, and it's usually a concept that seems like it doesn't go together. And it can be in a situation, like something happening in the story, or it could be written as a statement. And the examples I'm going to give you are written as statements, such as, we're born to die, or all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Remember George Orwell saying this in Animal Farm. Or if somebody tells you, look, less is more. When you write about a paradox, if you're analyzing how a writer uses paradox, you must include two parts. The first one, you got to explain why it seems to be contradictory. Why does it look like less and more can't go together? But then the second part, you need to explain why it's true nevertheless. You got to do both parts when you explain paradox. Okay? Now, number 42, aphorism. An aphorism is a short, astute statement of a general truth, usually a one-liner that's quippy and insightful and usually humorous, but not always. It just makes a poignant and pointed statement about life. Benjamin Franklin and Ralph Waldo Emerson are very famous for their aphorisms. When we get to them, we'll point out a few of them and you'll get to look at some of them. But here's one of them from Ben Franklin. He who lies down with dogs gets up with fleas. And we know this one from To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person till you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. An aphorism is kind of a statement that you can live by. You learn some life lesson from it. And you can find them a lot today on church signs and memes online. But the idea is to capture an idea quickly and succinctly rather than to explain it in depth. All right, number 43, colloquial diction or colloquialisms. Colloquial diction means an informal or conversational use of language. It's the language of the common people, language we use every day. For instance, if you say we're fixing to do something, that is colloquial to our area. People around here say that, but you'll never hear somebody from Minnesota saying that. Another example is the word choice, the diction of choosing to call it soda or pop or soft drink or just Coke. That totally depends on a region. So that's using colloquial diction. It's important to remember that when a writer chooses to use colloquial diction, he or she is choosing to create an informal, folksy tone. And that usually has the effect of relaxing the audience, helping us to feel included, as if we're just having a casual conversation. And therefore, it's not going to be used in formal papers or situations, like research papers or treatises or government documents or straight news stories. Pacing, number 44. Pacing is the relative speed or slowness with which a story is told or an idea is presented, how quickly the details are given, how much time is spent on background or information. And you can look at pacing from an overall complete piece standard, or you can look at it within a particular section or even within a particular sentence. When you're reading, pay attention to when the writer speeds up or slows down. If the writer's slowing down, it may be because he or she wants us to experience every aspect of what's happening individually, looking at it in an in-depth way. For example, when we read The Chase by Annie Dillard, she spent a really long time on the chase itself because that was her point. She was trying to show us that life is in the living of those individual moments and that we gain something by experiencing life and every moment of life and throwing ourselves into the moment. So she throws us into that moment in details. And so then you've got to ask, why does the writer want us to look at it in depth? And as we said with Annie Dillard, it has everything to do with her thesis. If the writer's speeding up, he or she may be trying to mimic a feeling inspired by the moment. Could be to create tension, to build anticipation, to create a feeling of exhaustion, to replicate a sound. So when it feels like the pacing's speeding up, look to see what feeling the writer's trying to create there. Next, 45, rhetorical questions. Now, you're all familiar with what a rhetorical question is. It's a question that's asked to produce more of an effect than to summon an answer, to make the audience internalize the subject at hand, apply it to themselves. And the effect of a rhetorical question is just that. When we hear a rhetorical question, we look inward. We take the subject that the writer or the speaker is talking about, and we apply it to ourselves and our particular situations. And that's quite effective if you want an emotional response. But you often see rhetorical questions used more frequently in speeches. Because usually you're wanting a direct result from the audience. In writing, it still can be used effectively if it's done sparingly. You don't want too many rhetorical questions. If the audience feels quizzed, they're probably not going to stick with you too long. And plus, you don't want to use it in place of making an argument or using evidence. It can never be your thesis. It's only used once in a while to create that emotional effect. All right, 46. You may be asked to analyze a writer's style. And that's what you're doing when you're looking at a TEMA situation. But anyway, the writer's style is his or her distinct quality of speech or writing created by the selection and arrangements of words and figures of speech, the rhetorical patterns a writer exhibits in his writing. So if you're describing a writer's style, you might want to comment about his or her syntax and common patterns in sentence structure. Now that goes from the smallest individual sentences all the way up to the overall style of the entire piece. For instance, with Hawthorne, we can look at generally his sentences are quite complicated. They have lots of dependent clauses, and he likes to insert appositives and authorial intrusion in the middle of a sentence. But then every once in a while he throws in a very simple short sentence, and when he does that for effect. And so you would talk about that as part of his style. But you'd also talk about his style in how he builds up to a climactic moment and then spends a long time on something that's not building to the climactic moment to build that anticipation to get to the moment you were waiting for. You can talk about the types of images the writer uses. Generally, they will demonstrate a pattern. If you'll pay attention, motifs, the very definition of a motif is something that shows up more than once. So that will be part of the writer's style. And the patterns of their word choices. Are they using colloquial diction? Is he using technical terms? Does she throw in a lot of qualifiers, which would be like words or phrases that put limits on what you're saying? I imagine, or if you will, or sometimes, or under these circumstances, those little phrases that put limits or conditions on them. If so, that sounds a little less certain than if you're stating it as fact. So all those patterns of word choices would be part of the writer's style. And of course, tone. And all of those things that we just talked about will help create tone. All right, number 47, pathetic fallacy. We've talked about that a good bit with Hawthorne. But pathetic fallacy is a literary construct in which the weather sympathizes with the actions of the plot or the feelings of a character. For example, when it's raining, when there's a sad scene, or when storms are brewing outside, when tension is rising in the plot, or when it's cold and windy, when the character has his heart broken. Some examples we've seen are like where it's raining at Gatsby's funeral, or when it's really hot on the day of the meeting at the plaza. And some examples we've seen in Hawthorne, when the son flees from Hester at the beginning of the forest meeting, when they're together and it's all cloudy, but then when they agree to run away together, the clouds part and the sun comes out, and the brook, and then later on the brook and the tree groaning in sympathy with Hester. The root word path always means emotion or feeling. And a fallacy is an error in logic. And pathetic fallacy is illogical. It doesn't make sense that the weather would sympathize with us, but it creates an effective atmosphere and develops symbolism and meaning through the setting, which is why Gothic writers like it so much. But I need to make a couple of changes on here when the clouds part and an error in logic. Okay, we'll get back here. So when you're writing about pathetic fallacy, you want to talk about why the writer doing that to create an atmosphere, what atmosphere is he creating, and how does that develop meaning in the story. Okay, 48 and 49 are both sound devices. Assonance and consonance. Assonance is repeated vowel sounds within a particular passage, but not necessarily rhyming. It could be rhyming would qualify as assonance, but not all assonance is rhyming. It could just be a replication of the short a sound, ah 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 ah. And consonance is repeated consonant sounds. And alliteration is a type of consonants, but not all consonants is alliteration. You might have just a lot of hard sounds, a lot of k and g sounds. Now, both of these, like I said, are sound devices. They're used to create a sound and to have a sound effect. Therefore, when you see a writer using it, you must ask what sound the writer's trying to replicate or trying to create. Why does the writer want those harsh sounding words or very slithery sounds or a bunch of e sounds? What's going on in the text right then that these sounds enhance? And that's how you would talk about those as rhetorical devices. And the last one, apostrophe. We talked about this in class last week. An apostrophe is when the writer speaks directly to an inanimate object as if the object were alive, and therefore it is a particular type of personification. Here are some examples. If you were to say, English class, you totally frustrate me, or this is a song from the late 70s, early 80s. Oh, love, look what you've done to me. When he's talking directly to love as if it were alive. And here's another one. I see people posting this sometimes on social media. Dear sleep, why do you elude me? Please come visit tonight. And the example we've seen so far is in The Scarlet Letter when Pearl talks to the brook. She's talking directly to it. And in that case, Hawthorne's using apostrophe to show her kinship with nature, how she communicates with inanimate objects, which is important in terms of romantic philosophy. And you'll see apostrophe most often in poetry, but it can be used in nonfiction as a technique to give life to the inanimate object, to turn it into a creature of some sort, to make the issue the focus. And so if you write about apostrophe as a technique, ask yourself why the writer wants us to view the inanimate object as living. Why does he bring it to life, and how does that shape the way we view the object? Okay, so here are your next 10 rhetorical devices. Study these. Look for them as examples. Be prepared to write about them. Your test will be Thursday, February 4th.